The Federal and SR Public Welfare Trust present the Pudukkottai Marathon 2025. This event is co-presented by Rupee Apex Group of Companies on Sunday, August 3.
Patriotism of the overseas Indians, all of whom say Bharat Mata ki Jai, Modi, Modi, Modi. All slogan hearing is very, very enthusiastic. But not one of them comes back. In 2024, 3,500 millionaires have left India. Last decade, 18 lakh Indians have given up their citizenship. Now, this is a large number. I think the idea of going overseas and not coming back is something we see towards the end of the 20th century. Because of the fact that people are actually giving up Indian citizenship, settling down overseas, and in larger and larger numbers, there is a feeling that, okay, something is going wrong with India. And yet we in India, particularly the current regime, goes on talking about Vikasit Bharat, about Amrit Kal, about a new India. Well, I'm sorry, this is the new India from which people are living in larger numbers. The number of countries which are willing to sell citizenship to India has increased phenomenally. They are looking for first world life today. We in India are promising them a first world life in 2047.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. We are going to be having a very special interview with Dr. Sanjaya Baru, who has been a journalist for several decades, who was the media advisor to the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, in the first term of the UPA government. He has been teaching in various universities at various times. He's written several books, most notably The Accidental Prime Minister, which was on Dr. Manmohan Singh. The reason why we are interviewing Dr. Sanjay Baru, oh, I just forgot one thing, that besides this string of things which is there with Dr. Baru, there's a very personal connect between us, that in the early 90s, he was one of the senior colleagues with who I worked in the Economic Times, somebody who we would always reach out to, try to understand economic liberalization. Dr. Manmohan Singh's budget was just unraveling. So, to get the economic handle on what was happening in the country from the political perspective, we would always be chatting with him. He has, the reason why I'm speaking with him, he has done this very exhaustive book, Secession of the Successful. More important that is the subtitle, The Flight Out of New India, which intrigued me more when I first got the publicity flyer of this book, that The Flight Out of New India. This was something actually which really excited me. Secession is also a very awkward word for a book of this kind. I'm using the word awkward because one doesn't normally expect words like this, which are actually very negative. So, Dr. Balu, congratulations and welcome to this program, and thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us in the middle of your busy schedule, several media interviews for this very notable book. Welcome to this program.
Thank you, Nilanjan. It's always a pleasure to reconnect with you.
Yes.
And meeting old friends is always a pleasure. And thank you for talking to me about my new book.
Now, your book delves into the reasons behind the increasing number of Indians, particularly the millionaires, who are seeking opportunities, work, professional opportunities, and residences abroad. Your book also begins with a quotation of who else but Dr. Manmohan Singh about the sun never really setting on a world which has some Indian or the other. Now, let me begin with the first question, which is also very much part of your book flap. Why are so many of our fellow citizens disentangling from the political and economic future of India to invest in the destiny of other nations?
Well, I mean, first of all, before I answer your question, let me very briefly state that there are two things I try to do in this book. One is to look at the changing, what I call the changing class character of immigrants from India in the last couple of centuries. For a long time in the 19th and early 20th century, we saw working class, very poor Indians going out as indentured labor as part of British imperial rule. And then starting in the 70s, we saw large numbers of Indian middle class, both skilled labor as well as professionals going out, the skilled labor going mainly to the Gulf, while
Mhm.
professionals were going mainly to the United States and to other Western countries. And the most recent phase is that of wealthy, they're what I call the millionaires, business people, and people who are, can afford to buy citizenship. So, to come to your question, I think very clearly one reason why you have this elite migration is because they can afford it. There
Mhm.
is increasing wealth at home in India. Over the last quarter century, we have generated, a large number of very wealthy Indians, thanks to the fact that India's economic growth has been, among the higher rates, better performing rates of economic growth globally. And so we have created a large urban and rural rich in different parts of the country, not all over the country, but certainly in both in peninsular India and in parts of northern India. So you have now a class of people who can afford. They can afford straight away to buy foreign citizenship, but they can
Mhm.
also afford to educate their children overseas. They can afford to educate them at home in better and better institutions to be able to then let them go overseas. So the supply side has changed, if you
Mhm.
like. On the other hand, you have a global demographic shift, especially in developed countries, where the age profile of those countries is such that they are looking for younger people, younger professionals, students, and they look at India, countries like India or even China for that matter, to attract these people. I mean, you take, for example, the British education system, almost for two decades now, has become critically dependent on Indian students going there. They pay the tuition fees. They live in the UK at their own expense, and
Mhm.
so a lot of British universities are actually surviving because of these large numbers of Indians who go there and pay for their education. So there is demand, and of course, in the United States, because of the IT talent that we have produced, the knowledge economy in the US attracts a large number of them. But there are other countries also now looking for people. I mean, the number of countries which are willing to sell citizenship to India has increased phenomenally over the last 10,
Mhm.
15 years. So there is demand. So when supply meets demand, you know, you have this phenomenon that we have been witnessing, and that's the phenomenon I draw attention to.
I drew attention to the word secession in your book title. Now, when we talk about secession in India, at least in the political, it's essentially talking about separatist movements in different parts of the country because of political, ethnic, religious, and economic reasons. So. But why does it make a presence in your title? And for different reasons. This is not cessation as we normally understand it. I would like to understand that from you.
Actually, the term secession of the successful I borrow from an essay written almost 33 decades ago by an American scholar, Robert Reich, who was
Mhm.
looking at what was happening within the United States, where rich people were withdrawing into their own communities, living in different spaces, and were no longer really living in areas where you had more poor people, right? And at that time, many of us wrote that this was also happening in India. I mean, Delhi is a classic example of a city. We have enclaves. You have what are called enclosed spaces, and now we see all over the country. So, the wealthy in India live in areas where they have their own private security, private water supply, private
Gated communities.
exactly, gated communities. So the concept of seceding from the wider public space into narrower and narrower gated communities has been explored by sociologists within a country. What I am doing in this book is to look at this at a global level. that the wealthy are now seeking their own space wherever they can find it, and seeking ease of business, ease of living, better opportunities, better lifestyle. And as I've said somewhere in my book, they are looking for first world life today. We in India are promising them a first world life in 2047. When Prime Minister says Vikasit Bharat in
Mm.
2047, he's saying that India will be a developed economy 25 years from now, in 2047. But we have a growing number of Indians who are not willing to wait till 2047. They can afford to live in the first
Right.
world today, and that is why they are going and living in that first world. So, in that sense, they're seceding from the India of today and seeking spaces for themselves wherever they can find them.
You know, this entire idea of people going abroad, though it has been there for a long time, right from the 1960s onwards and 1970s, that's the time, 1960s, the time when you were going through the possibly the senior stages of your school and in the process of trying to complete. I going in a few years later, when I look back, most of my classmates of school who went into the IITs are no longer in India. They got their BTech. We in JNU, where you were also there, would hop across to the IIT Delhi essentially because there were some friends, they had a nice canteen, chatting with them, but they are not here. The moment they finished their BTech, they just went away. And that was the trend in those days. Around the time, a few years later, after we finished college, Rajiv Gandhi became the prime minister, and the concept of the non resident India was coined. Hari Shankar Parsai was a leading Indian Hindi satirist. He used to have a column in the Dinman, which was the Times of India group, very leading magazine. He wrote an essay on the idea of non-resident Indians, and he used this abbreviation in Hindi called bha bha bha, Bharat se bhaga Bhartiya. We all laughed about it. But I now, when I read your book, I find that it's appropriate for these. Would you agree with me that these are the bhavavas, the Bharat se bhage Bhartiya?
Absolutely. You see, the point I make in my book is that Indians, first of all, people have been moving around for centuries.
Right.
So idea of movement is not new. But certainly, I think the after independence, for at least the first 2 decades, the phenomenon we witnessed was of Indians returning to India. And a large number of people who had gone abroad to study, because during the British era, everybody who could afford it or who had the opportunity would go and study in the British university, would come back. So apart from the very eminent people like Homi Baba or Vikram Sarabhai or K.N. Raj or Amartya Sen, large numbers of others also went overseas. And if you go back to my father's generation, my grandfather's generation, it was normal to go overseas, study, and come back. I
Right.
think the idea of going overseas and not coming back is something we see towards the end of the 20th century. It big Even when the working class went to Gulf, the Gulf workers, the idea was that they would work, they would make some money there, they'll get a better home back here, whether in Kerala or Telangana or wherever, and the children would get education, and they would save money and come back. So uh, the term NRI or non-resident Indian was used to describe those people who are seen as going overseas in order to accumulate some capital and return. And the
Right.
government of India had several schemes for them: NRI deposits, NRI bank accounts, etc.
Hmm.
And even as recently as 2001, when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee set up the LM Singhvi Committee on the Indian diaspora, even then I think the general assumption was that Indians who go overseas will come back. I think what has dramatically changed in the last 2 decades at least, last quarter century, is that actually we now realize most of them are not coming back. Now,
Right.
either they are living in developed economies and quite settled there, the children are settled there, they grow up, they get married locally, etc., and they're not coming back. Or even those who have gone to less developed countries, or particularly the Gulf, having made money then they go to developed economies. So you see a lot of Indians in the Gulf actually, after some point in time, going to Canada or going to Australia, or the children certainly going to Canada, Australia. So this progression of movement has really made the NRI a non-returning Indian.
Non-returning Indians. But you know, your book also focuses very emphatically on what has happened in the last 10 years. The phenomenon of the very rich leaving the country. You cite figures as many as 23,000 Indian millionaires have gone away from India, have given up Indian citizenship. This is a fairly large number, and I think, you know, would you say that this is the thought, you know, which led to the subtitle of your book, The Flight Out of New India? And what are the
Absolutely.
primary reasons of them not wanting to have any stake of what is being projected as New India on the path to Viksit Bharat, this being the Amrit Kal, etc., etc. A very publicity driven narrative.
Precisely. I mean, this is a phenomenon that I draw attention to. I mean, having looked at the whole history of mass migration over the last 200 years, I then focus on the more recent past. Incidentally, in my book, I mentioned 23,000 millionaires is a figure that Morgan Stanley put out a
That's
couple of years back, and that was between 2011 or 12 and 2023. Now we have latest data for 2024, just released last week. And in 2024, 3,500 millionaires have left India. So if you add 26,000 plus 3,000, I mean, the numbers are rising,
yeah,
right?
numbers
Now,
rise.
yeah. Now, some people would say, oh, but this is nothing. We are a country of 1.4 billion. What is 26,000? What is 30,000? What is even 50,000? Well, I think there are two aspects to this. One is the fact that we may be a country of 1.4 billion, but the number of millionaires are very few, and they have been created in the last 2 decades. The emergence of a large number of wealthy Indians is a phenomenon that economists have written about, particularly after the turn of the century. And so this is a new class of wealthy Indians, and one would have imagined in the past that they would stay here and invest in the building of this country, but you find them leaving. Now there are two aspects to this phenomenon which I draw attention to. One is the fact that they are buying citizenship. Unlike the NRIs who went to the Gulf, who are still Indian citizens, they have many
That's
of them
right.
still have Indian passport, or even those who went to the US, large numbers of them retained it. But now, because many countries are selling citizenship. I quote a number given by the External Affairs Ministry in Parliament that in the last decade, 18 lakh Indians have given up their citizenship. Now, this is a large number, right?
This is the
18
last.
lakh Indians giving up citizenship. So this is one aspect of this phenomenon I draw attention to.
And this is over
Uh,
how many years?
Last decade, so I think since
Last decade.
2014, yeah, 2014 to 24,
Okay.
18 lakh Indians.
That's really startling.
That is startling, right? And this is the decade of New India when we are saying we are building a new India. The second aspect of this New India stuff that I make is, the Prime Minister Modi has made it a habit to go and address overseas Indians all over the world. And these things have become big tamashas, like the Wembley Stadium in London, Houston,
Madison Square Garden
Madison Square Garden in New
started
York,
from there.
etc. Exactly. So, and everywhere in the world. Now, there, of course, he is kind of appealing to the patriotism of these overseas Indians, all of whom say Bharat Mata ki Jai, Modi, Modi, Modi. All sloganeering is very, very enthusiastic, but not one of them comes back.
Yeah.
And I make the point that you're quite happy living in London, welcoming the Indian Prime Minister with Bharat Mata ki Jai, but you will not come back to Bharat Mata. So this kind of false nationalism is another aspect of this diaspora. And I contrast it with people who went in the past who had no such thing. I mean, they were going for their own sake, for a better life, to earn more money, to educate the children, etc. Nobody said I'm going out feeling like that I'm a patriotic Indian and I'm going to be a symbol of India around the world. No, all that is nonsense. That was not happening. Today, now we are all these Bharat Mata ki Jai types all over the world that meet the Prime Minister, but are quite happy living where they are living. And I think this false nationalism is what I draw attention to.
This false nationalism, what you are trying to draw attention, that has always been the case right from the 1980s. That was the time when the BJP started on the path to to eventually take it to where it is now as the domineering party in India. That is on the shoulders of the Ayodhya campaign for a Ram temple. That is the time when Vishwa Hindu Parishad used to have global chapters across the globe. And I remember, there were several income tax, cases which were filed against them for donations which they received abroad, which were not accounted for. So there was a considerable amount of difficulty in the early years of the Narasimha Rao government, especially after the demolition. But we really do not know what came out of those cases. Mr. Modi is also, you talked about the tamasha thing you're talking about. We can all say, that when he goes out and addresses the Indian diaspora, he's not really talking only as the Prime Minister of India. In fact, he's primarily talking about the Hindu leader of India. It is the Hindu Hriday Samrat who is going and actually reaching out to people. So it is a very strong diaspora community, and there's this very peculiar. You're talking about the Indians living abroad shouting Bharat Mata ki Jai. There's this very peculiar paradox that in the United States. A large number of Indians are supporters of the BJP, of Hindutva, of Mr. Modi, but are also simultaneously anti Trump because, as American citizens or people who have vested interest there, they think that he is against their interests. So, uh, there is a greater amount of selfishness now than before. Is that what you are trying to say?
Well, I don't know about the word selfishness. I think
Okay.
basically, for example, I mentioned an incident in 1990 when you and I were colleagues in the Economic Times. I went to Washington, and
That's right.
Mr. Abid Hussain was our ambassador in Washington. And 1990 was the year of the balance of payments crisis. We had
That's
India was running out of foreign exchange. Our reserves were coming down to less than $1 billion. So the government of
Mhm.
India was very keen on raising dollars around the world. And I remember Mr. Abid Hussain, as ambassador, was addressing an NRI community. And he said, "Come with me." And I went with him. But the reception was very hostile. The general
Mhm.
reaction of that community of NRIs in Washington was, "We have run away from India. We have come to improve our lives here. You guys have done nothing for us back home in India. Here we have done something for ourselves. Now that you're in trouble, you're coming to us for help. Get lost." And I remember coming away from that meeting very disheartened, right?
Mhm.
But by 1998, when India tested nuclear, and there was a surge of kind of pride across the overseas Indian community. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee launched what was called the Resurgent India Bond, which was oversubscribed. And I make the point in the book that between 90 and 98, what happened? That the same NRI community, which was actually very selfish, to use your phrase,
Mhm.
by 98 was no longer that selfish. And I think one reason was that this pride in India, that India was
Mhm.
now doing better with the economic reforms of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and his Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, and the nuclear tests of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, etc., etc. I mean, the transformation in the Indian economy in the 90s and the emergence of the IT and the Infosys and Wipro and TCS. The
The
Indian
expansion of the FMCG sector, I
uh,
think, also
uh,
played a major role in the middle
exactly.
class thinking that this is our kind of country.
Exactly. So we were no longer kind of country of ambassador and Fiat cars, but we had the
That's right.
Marutis and the newer model. So there was a feeling that okay, this is an India we identify with, and that was what was the basis of a new thinking on overseas Indians, which is what I think prompted Prime Minister Vajpayee to appoint the LM Singhvi committee in 2001
That's
on the Indian diaspora, and then we had this Pravasi Bharatiya Divas and big event to welcome Indians overseas. So we went through this phase when overseas Indians were viewed as an asset, as soft power, as projection of India's development, etc. So there's a positive dimension. I think what we have seen in the recent past is that because of this alienation, because of the fact that people are actually giving up Indian citizenship, settling down overseas, and in larger and larger numbers, there's a feeling that, okay, something is going wrong with India. And yet, we in India, particularly the current regime, goes on talking about Vikasit Bharat, about Amrit Kal, about a new India. Well, I'm sorry, this is the new India from which people are living in larger numbers. And
But
the
why are they?
numbers, well, I think they're leaving for several reasons. I think first of all, as I said earlier, they can afford to. So there is the purchasing power. You can buy citizenship, you can buy education, you can buy property. So there is the supply side, and then there is a demand side. More and more countries need talented Indians, so they're attracting these talented Indians. But I think also there is a certain what should I say? Um, Tiredness
Hmm.
with the rhetoric that you have to wait for 25 years for your life to be better. People want their life to
Same
be
thing
better.
being said again
Yeah.
and again.
Okay. So you go on postponing your target. I mean,
Make
you
in
for
India started, not really made headway.
make in
Smart
India.
cities,
Exactly.
project gets wound up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we said make in India that manufacturing share of GDP will be 25% by 2020. That has still not happened. Then we said India will be a $5 trillion economy by 2020. That has still not happened. Then, so then suddenly the Prime Minister stopped giving any commitment to what he can do in his term. And suddenly we moved 25 years down the road and said by 2047 will be because of Bharat.
Two,
You
two,
know?
two things have, which are most visible. One is that there is this constant talk of the, greater concentration of wealth, which has been done. The disparity level is one thing. The other is constant talk of cronyism increasing and becoming rampant in the country. Everything is in a select few. If you are not part of that, then you are possibly, not likely to succeed very much. The other is what is called the Raid Raj, you know, Enforcement Directorate, CBI. You know, it's essentially used as a political tool. But I'm sure that even if affects the neighbor, people would get worried that they can come to me tomorrow also. Do you think those fears are also at play?
Yes, certainly they are at play, but this would affect only a very small, percentage, the
Section
top
of people.
stratum of society, not more than a few thousand people across the country. But I think what I feel more worried about is the professional middle class or the newly emerging upper class. That is, those who have made money in the last decade and are, startups and the new rich, etc. And they find that it's still a difficult place to do business. It's still a difficult place with all this GST tax, etc., and pollution in urban cities and lack of adequate safety. So it's safer to live in Singapore for your family or Dubai, even Dubai. You can have your business in India, but you live elsewhere. And I think that is something we see increasingly happening. That a lot of people who are actually emigrating may continue to do their business in India, but they are no longer a resident in India. I think these are the new trends that
You
we see.
had draw attention to the fact that during COVID, the government permitted, board meetings also to be joined from outside India virtually. That was, of course, the time of everybody went virtual. You and I are speaking primarily because of the advent of, so many softwares which are there, including the one on which we are talking, that we are doing it remotely. You could be sitting anywhere and we could be having a perfect conversation. Does the government need to go back and relook at this, permitting board meetings? Uh, the idea of the boardroom, we have grown up with those, visuals of Indian, Bollywood cinema of the 70s and 80s. Some of the finest, film climactic moments happened on these boardrooms across various films. Do you think there should be some thinking on the part of the government?
Well, I don't know if they will succeed. First of all, reversing anything like this is not that easy, particularly when it begins to impact the elite. I mean, you take, for example, the fact that large numbers of children are leaving after high school and going
That's right.
overseas for undergraduate education. I have a whole chapter on that. Now, you can't reverse that. If you reverse that, after all, you're impacting the elite. You're not impacting the poor or the lower middle class. And I don't see, political leadership in India across the board, not just in the Delhi today, but across the board, Indian political leadership having the courage to, upset the elite. But I mentioned that COVID thing just to draw attention to that fact that look, here is a simple measure adopted during COVID that allowed companies to have board meetings, online. And when COVID ended, naturally the government said, okay, we'll stop all these online meetings. But the Indian business came in and said, no, 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 please don't stop it. Because, many of them started living overseas. And as you know, during COVID, a large number of people left India to live overseas. And so they're quite happy to live overseas, and particularly the children and the wife and family settle down in developed economies, didn't want to get back. So, under pressure, the government agreed to continue this.
Uh, there is one more point to which you talk about. You talked about this recent program which was flagged off by the External Affairs Minister. It is not a government program, it is a private public kind of a partnership, which is called Gati, or the Global Action for Talent in India. And I heard you say in one of the other interviews that you gave that the government should actually be working on engaging talent within the country. Out here, it is trying to facilitate talent going outside India, which is actually detrimental to India in the long run. And that is what is the
Exactly.
study of your book.
Exactly. Actually, this Gati program, that is Global Access to Talented Indians, was launched by the foreign minister after my book came out. So I
Yes.
actually don't refer to it
You
in the
don't have
book.
a mention in it, but
Yeah,
it's
but
something which is
what I mention in the book is the philosophy behind a government official, a foreign minister, launching an initiative like this. And let me read out to you the quote. I mean, this
hmm,
is the foreign minister speaking in Parliament, Jaishankar addressing Parliament, and I quote him in my book: drawing a line. This is inside and that is outside. And when people go outside, we lose something. I think we need to get over it. Many of our key relationships have changed because actually Indians have built relationships abroad. If I look at Singapore, if I look at United States, if I look at the United Kingdom, I don't think our relationship would be where it is, would be the same if you minimize the diaspora factor. An expansion of the global workplace is actually to India's benefit. It is not something which is to India's detriment. Now, this is the philosophy that I question. That it is one thing for individuals to want to leave India and go overseas, and people do from all over the world. People leave in
right.
search of better opportunities, but it is quite another for a government official to actually defend this, theorize on this, and encourage this. I mean, here we are unable to provide employment at home, and we are trying to help people get employment overseas. We have sent thousands of Indian workers to Israel under a government contract, the government to government agreement between
Right.
government of India and Israel, because Israel is throwing out all their Muslim Palestinian workers and wants Hindu Indian workers to replace them, and we are part of that game. We have signed an MOU with Taiwan for industrial to export industrial workers, because
Yes.
Taiwan's industrial development, is being constrained by inadequate number of workers. They don't want to have more Chinese from mainland China, and therefore they're looking for more workers from India. So this game that we are playing, where we are actually creating talent at home and then exporting them, I'm not convinced that government should be encouraged,
Should
involved
be
in this.
encouraging this. So,
Yeah.
what do you think the government should be doing? Should it, is it actually, or let us start by asking, that you definitely think that there is a problem. That's why this book, you are
Yeah.
drawing attention to it.
Yeah.
Is the government aware that they have a problem on hand? Does it
Well,
actually
I
accept
think
it?
so. I think so because if you see, for example, the Prime Minister himself has been talking for some time about one ease of business, which is
Hmm.
really addressed to the flight of capital out of India. But in his last Independence Day speech in August 2024, he promised to set up a mission, a national mission for ease of living,
Hmm.
because we have not heard anything about that mission after that. And we are approaching our next Independence Day.
Yeah,
But
even the ease of business, let me remind you, uh, it used to be there in Gujarat also when he was the chief minister. He, in fact, used to say at that point that I have actually increased the ease of business by making everything a single window clearance system. That is what he had said was one of the major pillars of what was presented to the country as the Gujarat model.
yeah, so there is a recognition that there's a problem, which is
Hmm.
why all these slogans, ease of business, ease of living. But point is, what is being done, and why is it not having any impact on the emigration of talent and wealth? That's the question I raise.
One last question, the economist, you are an economist. You are not part of the government. You are not in any way involved in at the moment. For officially, you're not part of any policy formulation. You do definitely refer in the book and even in your conversations elsewhere that the economists of the 1960s, 70s, when brain drain, when the NRI, became a constant talking point. The economists of that time were constantly trying to write, educate people on that. Where are the economists? Do you find anybody really dwelling on it? Or,
Not at
why is it that when we talk about economists, we always talk about the Bhagavatis of the world?
In fact, Bhagwati is one of the few people who worked on brain drain
Yes,
before he,
that's
well,
right.
actually, even after going to the US, I mean, he published from MIT. No, in fact, this is the point I make. As a professional economist, you ask the question in the 60s when this trickle out was happening, or in the 70s when larger numbers were going, there was a consciousness within the policy making community among economists saying, okay, this is a problem. You know, we used to see people coming back to India in the 50s and 60s, but now we are seeing more and more people leaving India. And then all kinds of ideas were thrown up. I mentioned some of them. I think Bhagwati himself recommended a brain drain tax. VM Dandekar actually recommended an outright ban on, allowing students of graduates of medical and engineering colleges to go out of the country, etc., etc. All kinds of ideas, practical,
Hmm.
impractical, were advocated. There was debate, there was discussion, there are articles produced, there's some attention paid to the phenomenon. Today, there's none.
Hmm.
Today, there's none. And we have now become dependent on, we feel very proud that, okay, Raghuram Rajan is a great economist in the US, Geeta Gopinath is a great economist in the US, and we all read what they write about what India should do. You know, I
I was
mean,
just noticing on the social media there is a great excitement over Geeta Gopinath returning to academics and teaching career once again.
in Harvard, not in
Yeah,
India, right?
yeah,
So this
that's
is what I'm
nothing.
saying. I mean, they're all doing well for themselves. I mean, we had Kaushik Basu coming to India, becoming chief economic advisor after spending almost 2, 3 decades in the US, and then went back to the US. Arvind Subramaniam came, became chief economic advisor, went back to the US. So, this idea that, working in India is only part of your career, your CV, building your curriculum vitae. It is not about
Hmm.
actually investing in the future of this country. It is about investing in your own future. I think that is what you come to see.
So one last question, I just can't resist from asking you this. What you would want the government to do?
Well, I keep saying, I think this mission on the ease of living
Living.
is a fantastic idea. I don't know who put it in the Prime Minister's Independence Day speech. but he has now, at least 3 weeks before his next Independence Day speech. I wish they could carve out this initiative. Make it easier for people to live, which covers a whole range of areas, from taxation to sanitation to, you know, dealing with the personal security, urban development. All of these issues are day-to-day struggle of Indians. Better roads, no roads with potholes, guaranteed access to drinking water. You can think of any number of small things. It's not about a nuclear bomb and testing a nuclear bomb
Clean
and
air is something which
clean air,
people in the
pollution.
Indian capital
Yeah,
have been wanting for decades now.
exactly. So, first of all, define. I mean, when the Prime Minister says ease of living, by now his bureaucracy should have sat down and defined what is, what does he mean by that? What exactly do we understand at the level of the Prime Minister by the concept of ease of living? And then say, okay, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 items, and then tick off. What have you done? What will you do in 2 months? What will you do in 3 months? Instead of talking about 2047 and Amrit Kal and Viksit Bharat, tell us before the end of this term, and by 2029, what can be done? I think that is what in democracies voters expect of governments, that they deliver within their own term the promises they make, not make promise for the future and deliver nothing in the present.
Well, what you are saying, it reminds me of, what is possibly needed, when I studied Mr. Modi's working primarily as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, I discovered that he loved officers making PowerPoint. So once again, with the vision that he's presented, his officers should come back with bullet points, emphasize on the small things, so then they will be able to tackle a large problem, something like which is happening, the cessation of the successful and the flight out of New India. From New India, there cannot be a flight out if we want it to be Viksit Bharat. Congratulations once again, Sanjay Baru, and I
Thank
would
you.
request all viewers to please read this book. This is a fascinating reading, and thank you so much for sparing your
Well,
time.